Why I reached out to Curtis is because I have a retail background. I worked in retail for the first 13 years of my career. I was in charge of the all of the training, recruiting, and development for West Marine, which is a boating retail store. And I worked with 106 stores in the northeastern United States and also Western Canada. So I cut my teeth in retail, and like many of you, good morning. Like many of you, I know what it's like to meet a payroll. I know what it's like to work on razor thin margins. And when I saw this change coming, I instantly thought of Curtis and how this was going to affect the retail business. There's a lot of things that were changed, but the one that's causing the most concern, the one that we're really here to talk most about, is the minimum amount that you can pay an employee to qualify for the salary portion of the FLSA exemption. And that's a very technical way of saying that a lot of your people probably won't qualify for being exempt. A lot of the people that you have now that are exempt likely won't qualify for being exempt unless you make some changes. And we're going to talk about what those changes can be and should be. But before I do that, I want to sort of frame the discussion a little bit. I brought in some sales here. I'm a passionate sailor. I love to sail. Does any of you guys sail? No? Used to. So there's an expression out there which is a little tired, but it's applicable to this conversation, which is that you can't control the wind, but you can adjust your sails. And that's one way of looking at the situation. And I think that's great. You can make adjustments to maintain the status quo, and we can talk about those minimal adjustments that you need to make. But I want to challenge this group, and I want to challenge this industry in general to use these rule changes as a way to take a fresh look at how you're allocating your payroll, how you're using your payroll. And this might require you to go and change some job descriptions around, or move some positions around, or promote people, or change how things get done. Going back to the analogy, the great sailors, the fleet will change their sails. The fleet will adjust their sails. The great sailors completely look at the course differently. They'll tack, they'll move, they'll adopt a new strategy. So what I want you to do is, I want you to use the change to your advantage and use this as an opportunity to look. And they've got a smartphone, an iPhone or whatnot. Can they check emails from home? And the answer is no, not without being paid. Can they take phone calls from the office at home? The answer is no, not without being on the clock. So
same for maintaining social media accounts.
Yeah, exactly. Same for maintaining social media accounts. So the effect of taking someone from salary to an hourly position is a radical change in their job responsibilities and their duties at work. So we have to be thinking about that as well. It's not just a matter of saying, boom, you're now hourly, please don't work over 40 hours a week because I don't want to have to pay you overtime.
Exemptions. I had someone come in earlier this week saying, we're a retail place, but we also have an agricultural exception. I was like, well, let's back up. Under the federal law, you may have an agricultural exemption, but you don't have that under state law. So what we have here is an opportunity for us to look at all aspects of our pay practices, right? First, to look at foundational issues. Are we appropriately categorizing people as exempt, right? If not, it takes this whole issue kind of off the table because you have foundational cracks. Okay, and then once you've determined if you potentially do have someone who's federally exempt, we need to look at each of the states to determine whether or not under state law they're exempt. I mean, under federal law, if you work at an airport or if you work for a railroad, you can be exempt under federal law, but under state law, we don't have that exemption, which means that they are still entitled to overtime, right? People aren't looking at all these different aspects of it, and this is the time that you need to do it between now and December 1st, right? Comp time. The way that most people treat salaried employees is they don't have them clock in or they clock out, right? Which from let's talk best practices, right? Best practices is that all of your employees are somehow keeping a time record. The reason being is because when you're sued, right, while the plaintiff has the burden to prove his or her case, we as the defendant, right, as the business, have the burden to show that the person did or did not in fact work the hours that they're alleging. If we have a salaried manager who comes in and says, I've been working for the last 6 years for this guy, and I put in 60 hours a week, and you know that this guy maybe once in a blue moon is working 60 hours a week, most of the time is working bare minimum 40, right? If you don't have any records to prove that, it's his word over yours, and his word wins in that situation, right? So best practices has always been to have your salaried employees also keeping time records, just in case you've improperly characterized them as an exempt employee when they're really non-exempt, right? Track of their time is one of those things that's easy and that should be done, because in the long run, anytime you get a wage and hour lawsuit, right, even for small companies, you're looking at $500,000 easily, right? I'm working with a restaurant right now. Yesterday I did the numbers out for a potential tip violation issue, right? 1.7 million. 1.7 million for 20 employees.
Now I have an assistant manager. The store opens at 9. They have to be there early enough to get there, get themselves prepared, put their lunch in the fridge, get the lights on, get the registers open so the door opens at 9. When does their shift start?
Their shift starts after they're done putting their lunch in the fridge. It's really after, this is a very hot topic right now in labor law, because just as you said, in some cases it can take 20 minutes to don and doff gear in order to get to work. But in a retail setting, it really is as soon as they start doing work that's required of them, that you've required of them.
Yeah, and that gets tricky. So some guys like to come in at 8:50. Some guys like to be there at 8:30.
Yep.
Have a coffee, kind of settle in, and now
Yeah,
they
if they
that.
want to come in, and if you're requiring them to work, if their shift starts at 8:30 and they want to come in at 8:10 and read the newspaper for 20 minutes, I guess that's okay. I would discourage it. I'd tell them to read the newspaper at home, but they're not to punch in until their shift begins. What happens when they're bad at their job? When a manager fails, what happens? They typically end up doing all the work that they're supposed to be managing, right? So they can't delegate their jobs. They can't delegate their work. So they end up ringing out the customers. They end up selling the stuff. They end up sweeping the floor instead of having other people do it. There's a case in Massachusetts where it was a Dunkin' Donuts franchise where the manager was a bad manager, and he was just bad at delegating. So he ended up doing all of the work himself. He would go in on Sunday because he couldn't find people to work on Sunday, or he didn't try to find people to work on Sunday. He would just go in and work on Sunday, and he would go and sell the donuts, and he would ring out the people and ring out the customers. And a couple of years goes by after doing this, he brought a FLSA claim against the company, saying that yes, technically I was a manager, but I was essentially a bad manager and didn't delegate all of this work. Therefore you owe me an overtime wage.